And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather again showing low pressure here over interior Alaska, and that producing a widespread area of light rain and showers. Gusty winds out along the west coast here from the north and northwest, still possibly gusting up to around 40 miles an hour, St. Lawrence Island on up through the Bering Strait. Otherwise, high pressure and better conditions out here to the west, and some light rain and showers for the North Gulf Coast on down across portions of the Panhandle. And for Thursday, that becomes a little more widespread here over the southeast coast there as this front approaches from the west, keeps it wet and unsettled here for the North Gulf Coast. And a lot of shower activity over interior Alaska, to a lesser extent back to the north and northwest. And still a little breezy, but winds slowly diminishing here along the west coast as this higher pressure tries to push eastward ahead of that next storm we're watching. That looks like it'll bring some gale force winds into the northern Bering Sea around St. Matthew Island during the day on Friday, but that'll take until Friday night to reach the Pribilofs, and then the heaviest wind and rain staying north of the Aleutians, but some warm front rains reaching the eastern Aleutians. And you can see Friday, winds much lighter, in fact, light winds along the west coast with some areas of sunshine breaking out, especially up the Seward Peninsula, Noatak Valley there, Kotzebue, maybe Selawik, up to Kivalina. And drier, too, over the interior, and scattered showers become a little more numerous over the Copper River Basin, and periods of light rain along the North Gulf Coast due to this frontal system here, and some of that will even be affecting the central and northern Panhandle. And for the coastal water forecast down that way, for tomorrow, south winds 20 to 25 knots on the south coast, central coast, south 20 to 25 knots, and the north coast, south to southeast of 15 to 20. Small current advisories for Lynn Canal due to southerly winds at 25 knots, seas 5 feet, southeast at 20 for both Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait with 4-foot seas. And for Friday, small current advisories here all along the coast from the southeast 25 to 30 knots on the south coast, 8 to 11-foot seas, southeast 30 knots with 11-foot seas on the central coast, and east at 20 to 25 knots for the north coast with those seas up to 10 feet. Lighter winds for Lynn Canal, southeast at 10, southeast 15 for Stevens Passage, south winds 20 knots for Clarence Strait. Prince William Sound, Thursday, east winds 15 knots, eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast winds 15 knots, becoming light and variable here for the west side, and Cook Inlet, north 10 to 15, and west winds 25 knots for Kamishak Bay, northwest 25 for the Barren Islands. Friday's forecast, Cook Inlet, northerlies at 15 knots, 20-knot winds for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, also from the north. Prince William Sound, east winds 15 knots, same thing for the eastern North Gulf Coast, northeast at 15 for the western North Gulf Coast. Kodiak Island, Thursday, west winds 20 knots. Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, seas running 3 to 7 feet, and Bristol Bay, northwest winds 20 knots with 7-foot seas. Alaska Peninsula on Friday, northwest 20 knots. Bristol Bay, north at 15. Kodiak Island, north winds 15 knots with 3-foot seas. And for the eastern Aleutians, north to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots for the day Thursday, but light variable wind conditions here for Adak and Atka, and then southeast winds 20 to 30 knots for the western areas. And then on Friday, southwest winds become west at 30 knots for the areas west of Adak. Here for the central Aleutians, south at 25 with 4-foot seas. And then south to west winds, 15 to 25 knots for the Fox Islands. And for the southwest coast, small craft advisories for the Yukon Delta coast, north at 30 knots. St. Lawrence Island, north winds 30 knots. Norton Sound, north winds 30 knots. Kuskokwim Delta coast, northwest at 25. St. Paul, St. George, St. Matthew Island, northwest at 20 knots. And then for Friday, east winds coming up to 40 knots here with that frontal system and low pressure area approaching from the west, with seas building to 13 feet, but just 20 knots out of the southeast for the Pribilofs. And for Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, the southwest coast, north winds will be 20 knots with 4-foot seas Friday. For the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, tomorrow, northeast at 15, north 15 for the central and west side. And for the Chukchi Sea, north winds 20 to 25 knots, 5 to 9-foot seas. Friday, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, West winds 20 knots, seas 4 to 5 feet, west at 15 for the central coast, southwest 15 for the west side, and for the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots.